Welcome to Faith Wonders, where real stories of faith and miracles come alive from around the world.
The small coastal town of San Isidro, tucked along the eastern shores of the Philippines, had always lived at the mercy of the sea. The ocean was both a provider and a destroyer, a friend and an enemy. For generations, fishermen had ventured out in fragile wooden boats, bringing home fish that kept families alive. Women mended nets under the sweltering sun. Children played barefoot in the sand, and old men sat by the docks telling tales of storms that had passed and storms that would surely come again. Among the townspeople was a young woman named Maria de la Cruz. At 28, Maria carried the quiet resilience of one who had weathered hardship, yet refused to let it break her spirit. Her dark hair was often tied back in a simple braid, and her brown eyes glimmered with a mixture of determination and tenderness. Maria's husband, Ramon, was a fisherman like his father before him. He spent long weeks at sea, braving the unpredictable moods of the Pacific. At home, Maria cared for their daughter, Isabella, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with a mischievous smile and an endless curiosity about the world. Life was never easy in San Isidro, but it was a life stitched together by faith, family, and the rhythm of the tides. Yet, as October waned, a shadow of dread crept over the village. The radio crackled with warnings. Television anchors, their voices tight with urgency, repeated the same words again and again. A super typhoon was forming, stronger than almost any seen before. Its name was Typhoon Esperanza. Esperanza, which ironically meant hope, but to the people of San Isidro, it sounded less like hope and more like a harbinger of despair. Weather stations across the country tracked its monstrous size, winds howling at nearly 300 kilometers per hour, waves tall enough to swallow entire fishing fleets, rains heavy enough to drown the land. It was coming straight for the eastern coast, straight for San Isidro. Maria listened to the news with her heart pounding. Ramon was still out at sea. Would he return before the storm struck? Would she and Isabella survive if the winds tore through their fragile wooden home? That night, the air was heavy and strange. The ocean, usually alive with the sound of gentle waves, had turned restless, throwing white foam against the shore. Clouds gathered thickly, devouring the moon. The fishermen who had managed to return tied their boats as best they could, knowing full well the storm might smash them into splinters anyway. Families hammered plywood over windows, stored what little food they had, and filled every container with drinking water. But for all their efforts, everyone knew the truth. San Isidro's houses were like paper before the fury of such a typhoon. Inside her home, Maria lit a candle and knelt before a small statue of the Virgin Mary placed on a wooden altar. Isabella sat beside her, clutching a worn rosary with tiny fingers. The flickering flame painted soft shadows across the statue's face, making it appear alive, watching, listening. Maria whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "Holy Mother, please watch over us. Protect Ramon on the sea. Guard Isabella in this storm. Do not let despair claim us." The wind rattled the bamboo walls as though mocking her prayer. Outside, palm trees swayed violently, their fronds tearing in the rising gusts. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then fell silent. Maria extinguished the candle, but could not sleep. She lay beside Isabella, holding her tightly. Through the slats of the window, she could see lightning splitting the horizon, illuminating the churning sea. It was a sight both terrifying and mesmerizing, a reminder of how small humans were against the power of nature. Isabella stirred and looked up at her mother with wide, trusting eyes. "Mama," she asked softly, "will we be safe?" Maria kissed her daughter's forehead and forced a smile. "Yes, my love, do not be afraid. The Blessed Mother will be with us." Isabella tilted her head toward the statue on the altar, its features calm and serene despite the chaos brewing outside. "Does she really hear me when I pray?" the girl whispered. Maria's voice was gentle but firm. "She hears you, Isabella. She always does. Even when the winds howl and the waves roar, she hears every word." The child closed her eyes, whispering something inaudible to the statue before drifting back to sleep in her mother's arms. Maria remained awake, her mind restless. A strange sense filled her, an uneasy blend of dread and hope, as though something beyond her understanding was drawing closer with the storm. Hours passed. The town of San Isidro grew eerily quiet, the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from anticipation. The air was thick, the pressure heavy. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then, just before dawn, the first true gusts of the typhoon arrived, rattling roofs, shaking doors, and announcing the storm's approach like the footsteps of a giant.
Maria tightened her embrace around Isabella. Her heart beat faster with every howl of the wind. Somewhere out in the vast darkness, Ramon was battling the sea, fighting to come home. Here on land, Maria fought her own battle, one of faith, one of fear, one of waiting. She did not know it yet, but this night was only the beginning. Before the storm had finished with San Isidro, the people of the town would witness something that would change their lives forever. Something they would speak of in hushed voices for generations. Something miraculous. And so, as Typhoon Esperanza bared its teeth and lunged toward the coast, Maria closed her eyes, clutched her daughter, and whispered a final prayer. "Holy Mother, do not abandon us. If we must face this storm, let us face it with you by our side." Outside, the heavens roared. Inside, hope flickered like a fragile candle, refusing to be snuffed out. Dawn never truly broke over San Isidro that morning. The sky was a suffocating wall of gray, thick with rolling clouds that blotted out the sun. Rain began as a whisper, a soft pattering against rooftops, but within minutes it became a relentless torrent. Sheets of water slammed down on the town as though the heavens themselves had split open. The people of San Isidro had seen storms before. They had seen houses flooded, boats torn apart, trees uprooted. But this was different. This was not a storm, they realized with sinking hearts. This was a monster. The first scream came from a house near the shoreline, where the rising tide smashed against the fragile bamboo stilts until the structure collapsed, swept away in an instant. Families rushed from their homes, clutching children, holding one another's hands, searching desperately for shelter. Maria stood by the window, holding Isabella close, as the wind screamed like 1,000 voices. The little girl buried her face in her mother's chest, trembling. The wooden walls groaned, bending against the gale. "Mama," Isabella cried, her voice muffled by the storm outside, "is our house going to fall?" Maria didn't answer right away. She pressed her lips to her daughter's hair, whispering only, "Stay with me, Isabella. Do not let go." Then came the sound no one ever forgets, the shriek of tearing wood,
the howl of nails ripped from beams, the roar of an angry sea invading the land. The door shuddered on its hinges, the roof rattled violently, a window shattered, sending shards of glass across the floor. "Out! We have to go!" Maria thought, her heart slamming in her chest. She grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around Isabella, and rushed for the door. The moment she opened it, the storm hurled itself at them. Rain stung her skin like needles. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet. The street outside was already a river, water surging around her ankles, then her knees. People were shouting, neighbors she knew all her life, but their voices were swallowed by the storm. She saw Don Miguel, the elderly shopkeeper, struggling to carry his wife to higher ground. She saw children clinging to their parents, wailing in terror. She saw the church bell tower swaying dangerously in the distance, as if it too might fall. Maria pushed forward, clutching Isabella. They aimed for the stone church at the center of town, the strongest building, the only place that might withstand the typhoon. Each step felt impossible. The water surged, pulling at her legs. Debris floated past, planks of wood, a broken fishing net, the shattered remains of someone's home. "Hold on, Isabella! Hold on!" Maria shouted, though her voice was carried away by the wind. The little girl's arms tightened around her neck. "I'm scared, Mama! I'm scared!" Maria's heart ached, but she kept moving. She had to. There was no other choice. The storm seemed determined to break her. A piece of corrugated metal flew past, nearly striking her head. A coconut tree crashed into the road just meters away, blocking the path. Thunder exploded overhead, followed by a flash of lightning that lit up the nightmare around them, the town they had known being torn apart before their eyes. Still, Maria pressed on. She fought through waist-deep water, slipping, stumbling, but refusing to fall. The church was closer now, its stone walls dark and wet, its wooden doors shaking but still standing. She could see villagers pounding on the doors, begging to be let in. At last she reached the steps. Strong arms pulled her and Isabella inside. The doors slammed shut behind them, muffling the storm but not silencing it. The sound outside was still deafening, like an angry beast clawing to get in. Inside the church, dozens of villagers huddled together, soaked and terrified. The old priest, Father Santiago, stood at the altar, holding a crucifix high. His voice, though trembling, rose in prayer. "Lord, protect your people. Mother Mary, shield us in your mantle. Spare San Isidro from destruction." Maria sank to her knees, holding Isabella. The little girl was shivering, her lips pale. Maria wrapped her in the blanket again and whispered, "We are safe here, my love. We are safe." But even as she said the words, the church trembled. Rain leaked through the roof. The walls groaned. A part of Maria wondered, would even this sanctuary survive? Then, as if to answer her doubt, a sound rose above the storm. It was faint at first, a soft melody, almost like a hymn carried on the wind. Maria lifted her head, confused. The others heard it too. Murmurs spread among the frightened villagers. "Do you hear that? What is it?" The melody grew stronger, clearer, a voice, gentle and sorrowful, yet full of comfort. It was unlike anything Maria had ever heard. Isabella's eyes widened. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mama, It sounds like singing." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice. She had heard it before, not with her ears, but in her heart, in her prayers. The storm raged on, but the song continued, threading through the chaos like a strand of light in the darkness. Some people wept. Others fell to their knees, crossing themselves. Maria held Isabella tightly. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "Holy Mother, are you here?" The storm gave no answer, but the song did not cease. Warm, heartfelt, reverent voice, like a friend sharing a sacred story naturally. The stone walls of the church shuddered under the fury of Typhoon Esperanza. Rain slammed against the roof in torrents, leaking through the beams and dripping onto the floor. The wind roared like a chorus of demons trying to claw their way inside. Yet through all the chaos, the song persisted. It was no ordinary sound. It was soft like a lullaby, yet powerful enough to pierce the roar of the storm. It wove through the thunder, danced across the howling wind, and slipped into the hearts of those inside the church. Father Santiago froze at the altar, crucifix raised high. His lips stopped moving, his eyes widened, and his voice faltered. Slowly he lowered the cross, straining to hear. Children stopped crying. Mothers hushed their little ones, listening. The song was unmistakably a woman's voice, gentle, sorrowful, but filled with unshakable calm. Maria clutched Isabella closer, her heart hammering. She whispered to herself, not daring to say it aloud, "I know that voice." The song grew stronger. Words carried on the storm like fragments of a prayer. "Do not fear. I am with you. Do not lose hope. My children, I am here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some villagers fell to their knees, making the sign of the cross. Others clutched one another, unsure whether to believe or to fear. Father Santiago's voice trembled as he spoke. "My people, do you hear it? The Mother of God is with us. She has not abandoned San Isidro." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the stained brass windows of the church. For a moment, Maria thought she saw something, no, someone, standing just beyond the glass. A figure, bathed in light, radiant against the storm. "Look!" Isabella cried, pointing with her small hand. "Mama, do you see her?" Dozens of eyes turned toward the windows. Another flash of lightning struck, brighter this time, and there, unmistakable, was the silhouette of a woman. Her mantle shimmered with a blue glow, as though studded with stars. Her hands were outstretched, palms open, as if blessing the entire town. A collective gasp filled the church. Some wept openly, others shouted in awe. Maria's knees gave way. She fell to the floor, holding Isabella, tears streaming down her face. "It's her! It's really her!" The figure outside did not vanish with the lightning. Instead, she grew clearer, as though the storm itself bowed to her presence. The rain still fell, the wind still howled, but around the church, A strange calm formed, a circle of peace amidst chaos. Father Santiago, his voice breaking, cried out, "Our Lady of the Storm, protect us! Pray for us!" The villagers echoed him, voices rising above the storm in desperate, fervent prayer. Rosaries clinked, candles were lit despite the wind that tried to snuff them out. The small church, moments ago a place of fear, now pulsed with faith. Maria lifted her gaze again. This time she met the figure's eyes, or at least she thought she did. They were kind, sorrowful, yet filled with love so deep it pierced her very soul. For an instant, Maria felt her fear wash away, replaced by warmth. The Virgin's lips moved, though the sound was more felt than heard. "Take heart, I am with you." Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the ground. A giant wave had surged into the town, smashing homes and sweeping away what remained. The villagers inside screamed, clutching one another. Maria instinctively shielded Isabella with her body. But then, silence. The water that should have flooded into the churchyard stopped, halted as if an invisible wall held it back. The villagers rushed to the windows. Through the storm, they saw something impossible. The great wave, frozen at the edge of the church, swirling but unable to advance. "She's protecting us," someone whispered. "Our Lady is holding back the sea," another cried. Maria's tears fell freely. She pressed her forehead to Isabella's. "Do you see, my love? She has heard us. She is here." Isabella nodded, eyes wide with wonder. "She's saving us, Mama." But Maria knew this was not the end. The storm raged on, and many others in San Isidro had not found their way to the church. Their cries echoed faintly through the wind. Maria's chest tightened with sorrow. The Virgin's gaze seemed to turn, looking beyond the church as though she too heard the cries. Her mantle glowed brighter, and for a brief moment, the entire church was bathed in light. The villagers covered their eyes, trembling, not from fear, but from awe. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the vision outside faded into the rain. The light dimmed, the storm reclaimed its fury, and the church shook once more. But the people inside were changed. They no longer cowered. They prayed louder, stronger, voices united as one. Faith had replaced terror. Hope had risen from despair. Maria clutched her daughter, whispering into her ear, "No matter what happens, remember this moment. Remember that the Holy Mother was with us in the storm." Isabella nodded, holding on to her mother as though anchoring herself against the raging world. The typhoon had not ended. The night was far from over, but the seed of a miracle had been planted, and soon it would bloom. The night dragged on like an eternity. Hours passed, but to the frightened people inside the church, it felt as though time had stopped. The storm had no mercy. Its winds screamed through the cracks of the stone walls, and its rains hammered the roof as if trying to break it apart. The villagers prayed louder and louder, their voices rising to drown out the terror that threatened to consume them. Maria sat on the cold stone floor with Isabella in her lap. Her daughter's small hands clutched the rosary so tightly that her knuckles were white. Maria stroked her hair, whispering prayers with each breath. Yet, even as exhaustion threatened to drag her into despair, she remembered the vision she had seen, the lady outside the window, her mantle glowing like stars. That memory gave her strength. Suddenly, the doors of the church burst open. A group of men staggered in, drenched, their faces pale with fear. One of them, Antonio, shouted above the roar of the storm, "Father Santiago, half the town is gone. The sea has swallowed the shoreline. People are trapped." Gasps and cries filled the church. Mothers wept. Fathers clenched their fists in helpless rage. Maria's heart clenched at the thought of neighbors and friends still out there, facing the full wrath of Typhoon Esperanza. Father Santiago stepped forward, gripping his crucifix with both hands. His voice shook, but it was firm. "We must pray harder. Pray not only for ourselves, but for those still outside these walls. Our faith must extend beyond this church." The villagers obeyed. Rosaries swung, hands folded, knees bent to the stone floor. A great wave of prayer rose like incense toward the heavens. And then it happened. A sudden stillness settled within the church. The air seemed to change, warm and luminous. The candle flames no longer flickered. Even the howling of the storm seemed to fade into the background. Maria lifted her head, sensing something extraordinary. And there she was. The Virgin stood in the center of the church, not outside, not beyond the windows, but inside, among them. Her presence radiated light, soft yet unearthly, filling every corner of the room. She was dressed in a flowing mantle of blue that shimmered with stars, her gown white as the purest dawn. Her face was gentle, her eyes tender yet sorrowful, as though carrying the weight of the world's suffering. Gasps echoed through the church. Some people fell flat to the ground, unable to bear the sight. Others wept openly. Father Santiago dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Our Lady," he whispered, "Holy Mother of God." Maria clutched Isabella, who stared in awe, her lips parted. "Mama, she's real," the girl breathed. The Virgin's voice filled the room, not loud, not booming, but soft and clear, like a whisper that reached every heart at once. "My beloved children, do not be afraid. I have heard your cries. I have seen your suffering. I am with you." Her words wrapped around them like a warm blanket in the cold. Fear melted into tears. Despair melted into hope. Then she raised her hands. At once the walls of the church trembled, not from the storm, but from the power of her presence. Light poured from her palms, flowing like streams of water through the cracks of the doors and windows, spilling into the storm outside. Those inside gasped as visions appeared in the light. They saw families clinging to rooftops as floodwaters rose, and suddenly invisible hands lifted them to higher ground. They saw fishermen tossed in the raging sea, and suddenly their boats steadied, waves breaking harmlessly around them. They saw children trapped in collapsed homes, and suddenly the debris shifted, creating openings for them to escape. Maria pressed her hands to her mouth. Tears fell freely as she realized what was happening. "She's saving them, all of them." Isabella smiled through her tears. "She's saving Papa too, Mama. I know she is." The Virgin's mantle spread wide, shimmering brighter than lightning, and everywhere the light touched, miracles unfolded. The floodwaters receded from certain homes. The winds, once wild and murderous, seemed to bend, circling around the church instead of tearing it apart. It was as if the entire town of San Isidro had been placed under a shield, fragile, yet impenetrable. Father Santiago's voice rose in awe. Our Lady has placed her mantle upon this town. We are under her protection. The villagers broke into sobs, cries of gratitude mixing with prayers of praise. They no longer begged for survival. They thanked for salvation. Maria looked up at the Virgin, meeting her gaze. In that moment, she felt as though the Lady saw her, knew her, loved her. All the burdens of her heart, the fear for Ramon, the struggle of poverty, the worry for Isabella, were laid bare, and yet in the Virgin's eyes there was only compassion. Then the Lady spoke again, her voice trembling with sorrow, yet radiant with love. The storm will pass, but you must not forget this night. Do not let fear blind you again. Carry faith in your hearts, for faith will protect you when walls and roofs cannot. I am with you, always. Her light grew brighter, so brightened that it was almost blinding. Maria shielded Isabella's eyes, but the child laughed softly, unafraid. And then, as suddenly as she had appeared, the Virgin was gone. The church was silent for a long moment. Only the storm outside reminded them that time had not stopped. But the people inside the church were forever changed. Maria fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. She hugged Isabella tightly, whispering, "She was here. She was really here." And though the storm continued to rage outside, though destruction still tore through San Isidro, the people within the church no longer trembled, for they had seen a miracle. The Lady had walked among them, and the storm would never be the same again.
When dawn finally broke over San Isidro, the world felt almost unreal. The storm had spent its fury, leaving behind a town that looked as though it had been ravaged by giants. Roofs had been ripped from houses, debris floated in muddy waters, and trees lay uprooted like fallen soldiers. The smell of salt, rain, and wet earth hung heavy in the air. Yet, amid the destruction, the stone church stood firm. Its doors, though battered, were intact. Windows had survived the wind's wrath, and the wooden pews, soaked and scratched, had not toppled. To the villagers emerging cautiously from the church, it was nothing short of a miracle. Maria held Isabella's hand tightly as they stepped outside. The little girl's eyes widened at the sight before her. Homes were shattered, fishing boats had been flung onto the streets, and some neighbors' huts were completely gone. Yet the church's immediate surroundings, its small yard, the paths, and even the little garden Maria had tended, remained untouched. It was as if a protective barrier had shielded this space alone. "Look, Mama," Isabella whispered, pointing at a coconut tree that should have fallen but still stood, leaves glistening with rain. "It's like the church is magic." Maria nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight with awe and gratitude. She glanced around at the villagers, many of whom were crying tears of relief. Fathers hugged their children, mothers wept openly, and strangers embraced one another, silently sharing the miracle they had all witnessed. Father Santiago emerged from the church, his vestments soaked, but his face radiant. He raised his hands to the crowd. "Do you see, my children?" he shouted. "Our Lady has protected us. She walked among us last night. Her presence saved the lives of all who sought refuge in this house of God." The villagers murmured, half in disbelief, half in wonder. Some knelt immediately, making the sign of the cross. Others whispered prayers, thanking the Virgin Mary for her protection. Maria looked toward the horizon, anxiety still tugging at her heart.
Ramon. She could not rest until she knew he had survived. Suddenly, a shout pierced the morning air. "Ramon, over here!" She turned to see Ramon struggling through the flooded street, soaked to the bone, but alive. Relief crashed over her like a wave. She ran, dropping to her knees as he scooped Isabella into his arms. Tears mingled with the rain still falling lightly from the dissipating storm clouds. "You're safe. We're safe," Maria whispered, clutching him, unable to stop trembling. Around them, people began surveying the damage. They found neighbors trapped in the ruins of their homes, families pulled from flooded streets, and children rescued from debris. Those who had been caught outside somehow survived, often citing strange feelings that guided them to safety, as if unseen hands had led them away from the worst of the storm. Among the wreckage, the villagers began noticing subtle signs that strengthened their faith. Puddles shaped like footprints leading towards the church, a small white flower that had grown untouched on the flooded ground, and a faint shimmer in the air whenever someone whispered a prayer. Each sign reminded them that the Virgin's presence had not been fleeting. It had been real, tangible, and protective. News of the miracle began to spread quickly. Villagers sent messages to nearby towns, and even radio broadcasts picked up the story. "San Isidro survives Super Typhoon Esperanza. Locals claim miraculous intervention by the Virgin Mary." Skeptics and believers alike listened. Some curious, some amazed, but all captivated by the tale of a storm that had destroyed so much, yet spared the faithful. Maria and Isabella stood together near the church, watching as neighbors cleaned debris and salvaged what they could. Maria felt a strange serenity, an inner peace she had never known before. The fear that had gripped her heart during the night had been replaced by an unshakable sense of faith. "Do you remember what she said, Mama?" Isabella asked softly. Maria smiled, brushing the wet hair from her daughter's face. "Yes, my love." She said, "Carry faith in your hearts, for faith will protect you when walls and roofs cannot. I am with you, always." Isabella nodded, eyes wide with understanding. "I'll remember it, always." And as the sun rose over the battered yet surviving town of San Isidro, Maria knew that life would never be the same. The storm had left scars, yes, but it had also left a story of hope, courage, and divine protection. The people of San Isidro had faced the wrath of the sea, and lived to tell a tale that would be passed down for generations. The night the lady appeared, walking among them in the heart of the storm. Even as rebuilding began, hearts remained lifted. Families clung tighter to one another. The church became a sanctuary not just of faith, but of memory, a place where the miraculous could be remembered, revered, and shared. And in the distance, the faint shimmer of dawn sunlight on the wet streets seemed almost like a blessing, a quiet reminder that the Virgin's presence lingered still. San Isidro had survived, not merely because of stone and wood, but because of faith, courage, and the miraculous intervention of the Holy Mother.
Weeks had passed since Typhoon Esperanza struck San Isidro. The town bore scars of the storm, roofs torn away, trees uprooted, and streets flooded. But amid the destruction, the stone church stood untouched, a symbol of divine protection. Villagers emerged cautiously, hearts still pounding, eyes wide with awe. Maria held Isabella's hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. Ramon had returned safely from the sea, and families huddled together, counting their blessings. Stories spread of invisible hands guiding people to safety, of children and elders preserved against impossible odds. Every survivor whispered the same truth. The Virgin Mary had walked among them, shielding her children in the heart of the storm. The church became a sanctuary of faith, where prayers were lifted in thanksgiving, and stories of that miraculous night were shared again and again. Maria often thought of the lady's words, "Carry faith in your hearts, for faith will protect you when walls and roofs cannot. I am with you, always." Those words resonated deeply, reminding her that courage and hope could endure even the fiercest trials. San Isidro slowly rebuilt, but its people had changed forever. They had witnessed a miracle, felt a presence that transcended fear, and learned that faith was stronger than any storm. Children played on the sands once more, families worked together, and a quiet sense of peace settled over the town. And in every heartbeat, in every prayer whispered at the altar, the memory remained. The lady in the storm had come, had saved them, and her love would never leave them. Hope, faith, and courage endured, lighting the hearts of San Isidro long after the winds had passed.